Welcome to this very special episode of Politically Basic. I'm on location in Los Angeles with Steve Hilton. He has led every poll for this gubernatorial race since the beginning, and we're 2 weeks out from the wild and crazy anything can happen jungle primary. I'm going to ask him all the questions, as I always do, and we're going to see what he has to say. So, Steve, thank you so much for meeting me here in beautiful...
All the questions. That's terrifying. No, I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're the best. You always show up for Politically Basic, for me, and for the constituents and the voters. And we really appreciate that about you so much. So we're 2 weeks out from this primary. How are things going generally?
Well, the phrase that I seem to find myself using is "so far, so good." I've never run for office before, so I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. I think it feels, for me, a combination of confidence and, we got this. Things are going basically according to plan, and total terror, paranoia and anxiety that actually it's all a mirage and these poll leads that you describe don't turn into actual votes. And how does that mechanism happen? How does it go from being whatever it is in the polls to the right number of votes being actually cast to make sure that I'm in the top two? So I don't really know what to make of it, but I think we're doing everything we can. Here we are. I mean, so far, so good. That's the phrase, I think.
I think you have a lot of reason to be cautiously optimistic. You have really led in the polls consistently since you entered this race, which is exciting for a lot of people who are, of course, very disappointed with current leadership and the direction that the state is going. But the culture of this particular election has been really different. And we've seen just kind of the culture of voters shift. So many people switching registrations, mostly from Democrat to independent, but just in general, also a lot of people moving toward the middle. Do you think that is going to play out in your favor? Because as you say, we don't know where all those votes are going to land. And we have this sort of independent class who we can't quite tell yet which way the wind is going to blow. How are you feeling about the independents?
Well, I think within these polls, when people break down the support, I'm actually leading by far among independents compared to other candidates. But again, that's a poll. I think that my response to that is to say, I very much have seen my race and the campaign that I've been running, the platform, the policy arguments, as being something that appeals to people right across the board. I remember the very first interview I did with a well-known reporter in Sacramento, Ashley Zavala. She's a fantastic terrier up there. She kind of goes after politicians on all sides. And I remember saying to her that I don't think my campaign is particularly partisan. And she said, well, that's a kind of strange thing to say. But I do feel that because the key points of it are things that everyone can get behind. I mean, I've been saying the same thing since the beginning. We've got to make our state Cal affordable, in my word. $3 gas, cut your electric bills in half. Your first $100,000 tax-free, a home you can afford to buy. Behind each one of those is a policy reform plan, and people may disagree about the changes that we need to make to achieve those things, but they are not controversial things. And in that sense, there's a broad appeal. However, one thing I always want to be clear about is that having a broad appeal and making something making an argument that really goes beyond party lines does not equal moderate. That's a word I actually don't find helpful in this conversation because the changes we need to make actually have to be pretty aggressive. They need to be big. And I think once you start talking about moderate and use that word, it conveys a sense of wishy-washy compromise. And I think that's not where we need to be in California. We've had 16 years of one-party rule. It's a disaster. It's a total disaster. If you look at the outcomes, we're the worst performing state on almost everything that matters. It's actually stunning how badly they've messed up. I mean, just to quickly run through those points, I make them all the time. Right now in California, we have the highest poverty rate of any state, tied with Louisiana, the highest unemployment rate of all 50 states, the highest cost of living by far. When you break down cost of living, the individual items, highest gas prices, highest housing costs, and so on. more qualitative measures. US News and World Report ranks California 50th out of 50 states for opportunity. Wallet Hub, 50th out of 50 for affordability. Chief Executive Magazine, they do an annual survey of business conditions, 50th out of 50 for business climate, 10 years in a row. So all of these things show something really deeply wrong. And we've got to be aggressive in confronting that. So while the outcomes that I want and the direction I want to take the state very much have a broad appeal, the attitude we need to get there is absolutely not a kind of moderate, water it down, let's all get along. No, we've got to really take on this bloated, bureaucratic, nanny state government that has driven all these problems.
Thank you for saying that. I think the voters feel that that is so refreshing to hear, because we are in a climate where we don't have the luxury of electing someone who's just going to come into Sacramento and keep the status quo going. So you're really the only candidate who is approaching this as, we have so many problems. If we don't get in and get straight to work fixing them, we're really headed
and aggressively. I mean, that's the thing I want to be really clear about. It has to be very aggressive, because you've got an entrenched bureaucracy there. And even if you would concede that some of these things we've ended up with are policy outcomes based on an original intent that was kind of good faith, you know, I mean, I'm very happy to concede that some of these things are motivated by a desire to, I don't know, protect workers or help the environment, whatever it may be. They're not deliberately turning California into this disaster zone where hundreds of thousands of people are leaving and businesses are leaving and businesses choosing not to come. But they are even if they're an unintended consequence, they are the consequence of a very, very ideological agenda that's been driven through from the left. And I think we've got to confront it. We can't just say, well, fine, let's, chip away at the edges. No, it needs a wholesale, aggressive turnaround.
Do you think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit? Day one, when you're elected and you're in office, are there a slew of things that you can just get straight to that should have been done for years, that have been neglected, that you can get right to?
Yes, because some of the things are decisions that were made within the bureaucracy, within the executive branch, by appointees of the governor, at the direction of the governor, and they can be reversed pretty quickly. You don't need the legislature to do that. Some of the things will take a bit longer. We can get into that, but I'll give you a couple of examples, both really fundamental in terms of resources and costs in California and the ability of our businesses to compete. So you look at the situation with water in the Central Valley and other parts of our great ag industry. I spent a lot of time there. Actually, of course, it's true that we need to build more infrastructure for water. We're a state of 40 million people, roughly. The infrastructure we have is exactly what we had when we were 20 million people, even though the voters of California voted for a bond to build water infrastructure over a decade ago. That hasn't happened. None of it's been built. So yes, in the medium to long term, we need more water infrastructure. That's obviously not an overnight thing. However, within the current infrastructure, you can literally increase deliveries of water to our farmers by changing the biological assessments in the State Water Resources Control Board. I'll have them written before we get there. We're already working on that now. And appointing people to those agencies who will implement it immediately. And those appointees will be ready. I mean, half of them I've already named the person I'm going to nominate for Secretary of Natural Resources, who will oversee all this, John Duarte, former congressman. So, these are things that can happen very rapidly. It's not quite as simple as turning on the tap, but not far off, truly. Same with oil production in a little bit further south in the Central Valley, Kern County. I spent a lot of time there. Again, the closing down of California's oil and gas production has happened as the result of very specific administrative action within the regulatory agency controlled by the governor, the California Department of Geologic and Energy Management, CalGEM. And so those people in there who are refusing to issue permits for oil and gas production, the maintenance of existing wells, the expansion of existing wells, drilling new wells in existing fields, those people will be gone, and they'll be replaced by pro-energy people, day one, who will have instructions from me through executive orders to issue permits to the industry. So that's not quite overnight, but very quick change.
Yeah. I just want to affirm that, I'm a Central Valley girl, born and raised Californian, Kern County, I understand farming, I understand O&G, and how critical that is to not just to California, but to our nation.
Yes.
And candidates rarely, Sacramento rarely understands the issues and support farmers and those who are giving so much infrastructure and resource support to the state and the nation. So I really applaud you, and I know how much time you've spent there talking to the
and
right
I've really
people.
learned, and that's the way you do it. I mean, I feel very strongly that the time I've put in, remember that it's now just over a year since I entered the race formally as a candidate, but the previous 3 years I spent with my policy organization. It was really me and one guy who helped me, but traveling the state, Golden Together. And I've been really spending a lot of time and learning in detail about what's gone wrong and how we put it right.
Let me ask you this. Is the Democrat supermajority a hindrance, or is there opportunity there for our next governor to work with them? Should it be you? Should it be a Republican?
Well, I'll try and work with them because that's my attitude, to work with anyone. There's no question that it's a hindrance in the sense that they've been passing some of this, they've been passing all of the legislation, some of which is really extreme and destructive. And you've had a governor in the form of Gavin Newsom who just hasn't pushed back. I mean, one of the things you hear about Gavin Newsom in Sacramento, he's just not engaged. I mean, even in comparison to Jerry Brown, the previous Democrat governor, and the story about him is that, you know, he was there and he was in the conversation, shaping what came out of the legislature. Newsom isn't like that at all. I will be like that because I'm, you know, as I often point out, as a naturalized citizen, this would be the highest honor for me. I can't run for president. I mean, Newsom seems to be completely focused on running for president. So in terms of the legislature, there's no question that you know, the 2/3 majority has been a disaster because they've had no check. And, you know, our system is built on checks and balances. There's been no check, no balance. And so they've been pushing this extreme legislation that often is directed, you know, cooked up by the interest groups that control the Democratic Party and own the legislators. So you've got the unions, the climate lobby, the race and gender activists, you know, the sort of hardcore left controls those politicians. And so you've seen this extreme legislation. Now, when I'm there, when I'm elected as governor, the way I always put it is that will be a political revolution. And I'm sure it will shake things up. They're not expecting it. I see that the way they talk. They're so arrogant. They assume that a Republican can't possibly win, but they're in for a shock. And I think that will change the dynamic a little bit. But even if they still have an implacable hostility and assume that nothing needs to change, even though the people of California will have voted for change, then I'm going to be very aggressive in holding them accountable for that. And I'll say very clearly, look, the governor's race is the one that gets all the attention. No one has any idea who their state assembly member or state senator is. They have no awareness of what they ran on compared to what the governor's race was all about. There's no question who's got the mandate here. The governor, the newly elected governor, who will have been elected on a very clear platform for change. And so I will expect them to work with me to deliver that change. And if they refuse to do it, then I'm going to be very, very aggressive in holding them accountable for their attempt, let's use their phrase, to overturn an election, because that's what they will be doing if they don't cooperate. So there'll be absolutely no question about my attitude towards them, but at the same time, an attitude of willing cooperation. I'll sit down with anyone to get good results. And actually, just to be maybe a little bit more positive about it, I think there are areas where I can already see opportunities for compromise, because you're seeing it from some of the other Democrat candidates for governor. I've been on stage with them many times now in these debates that we've had, and even within the Democrats, there's agreement on lots of things that need to change. For example, Katie Porter agrees with the first part of my tax plan, first $100,000 no state income tax, to help working people who are really struggling, who are paying 9.3% income tax, state income tax on incomes that you can barely live on. So I think we'll be able to get some agreement on that. There's a widespread agreement on the bureaucratic barriers in the way of building housing and so on. So I think that we can make things happen. But again, going back to where we were just a moment ago, even if they want to be completely obstructive. And there's, I recall campaigns from day one and whatever they want to throw at me. If you know what you're doing, the governor's job is a very powerful one if you know how to use the executive branch, and I do, and I will.
Absolutely. Great answer. Let's continue talking about cooperation. And just to follow up on that thread, I think that the cat's been away and the legislators have played, right?
Yes.
They have not had a strong leader in the governor's mansion, and they've just kind of been willy-nilly writing legislation and passing things that have not been good for the state. So I do think strong leadership is going to have a really good result with the supermajority and with those who would traditionally maybe be opposed to somebody of a different political party up there. Gavin Newsom brought, again, a different culture to leadership in California as it relates to the federal government and the White House. He almost made it his personal mission to fight Trump. And it really did not do a service to the people of California.
Of course.
It was all about him. Of course, he's running for president. It's not going so well. He's actually slipping in polls now. I think he's behind both Kamala Harris and AOC at this point. So he might be spending even more time between now and January when a new governor is inaugurated on that. What would you say to voters who maybe they're not crazy about President Trump? They're not crazy about all of his policies or his leadership style. But we've got to get back in this state to a more cooperative relationship with the federal government.
And I think that applies whatever the party, components of that relationship are. If it was a Democrat president and I'm a Republican governor, it's my job to have a good relationship with the president and their team in order to get good results for California. I would actually argue that the federal government has too much role in state affairs. I'm a strong believer in the 10th Amendment. And I've always argued that the 10th Amendment, for those who don't know, is the one that really enshrines the principle of federalism and the decentralization of power, that the powers not specifically listed in the Constitution as being powers for the federal government, this is the quote, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I think that the federal government has gone way beyond that. Healthcare, housing, all of this. And of course, education, none of those things, in my view, should have anything to do with the federal government at all. So I'll be fierce in arguing for that power to return, regardless of who the administration is. But I think that it's very clear that you've got whole areas of policy where the Trump administration, and remember, it's not just the relationship that I have with the president. He endorsed me for governor, but also half the cabinet. I know personally, friends of mine, Sean Duffy in transportation, Doug Burgum at Interior, Brooke Rollins in agriculture. These are really important positions for key parts of what goes on in our state. And so I'll be there ready and with a relationship already established to work. And the direction that they want to go is the same direction I want to go. Chris Wright and the president and Doug Burgum want to open up energy production, both in the Central Valley but also offshore with the Sable in Santa Barbara, that massive oil reserve that Gavin Newsom wants to leave in the ground. And so I will go, we agree with the federal government on that. Same with forest management, where the president's put out a really strong executive order on how we can be more sensible about managing our forests and preventing wildfire risks and reviving our timber industry. You got the state blocking that. Finding fraud, it's another example. You've got the vice president with his fraud task force. Again, someone I know personally, the vice president. We know each other well. So these are all going to be areas where you're going to see a whole new attitude of cooperation, but it's very practical things. You're right, of course, that many people in California, don't like President Trump, to put it mildly. But these are common sense areas of policy. If you open up oil and gas production in California, you lower gas prices. If you manage the forest properly, you reduce wildfire risk, you actually reduce carbon emissions, you revive our timber industry, you reduce the cost of housing because you have lower cost construction materials. If you find fraud and root it out, you can cut spending and cut taxes without harming essential services. So all these things, to me, are common sense areas where if you've got a cooperative relationship, you can deliver better results for Californians.
You're bringing it right back to the job duties of being governor and leading a state, that cooperation has to happen. And we've gotten so off track on that. It's
I know.
become a personal, beef between political leaders who want to continue rising the political leadership ladder instead of what's best for people that they represent. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. I'm highly concerned that Tom Steyer doesn't understand our system of federalism and believes that you can kick ICE out of a state and make a sanctuary state that does not include any cooperation with federal agencies and things of that nature. A couple of his debate answers were a little bit concerning about his understanding of our system of government.
He's staked out a position on the far left. That's his choice that he's made. He thinks that's how he's going to win. I don't even know whether he believes these things. He's saying them clearly because he thinks that's where the energy and the support is in the Democratic primary. I mean, he'll learn what the Constitution is, but I don't think he's going to get to that point because I don't see him being elected. Who knows what's going to happen with the top two, and it looks at the moment as if it's basically there's a top three in this race, myself, Tom Steyer, and Javier Becerra. We'll see. But I think that, exactly to your point, immigration and immigration enforcement are obviously matters for the federal government. The choice is not whether you do it or don't do it as the governor. The choice is whether you proactively obstruct federal law enforcement. And he's saying that he will, which I think it's almost, I mean, actually, if you look at it in a serious way, it's kind of disqualifying, actually.
The governor of California has a role that goes far beyond just the state. It's really global when you think about it. We saw Gavin Newsom show up to the World Economic Forum and really be an embarrassment, not just for the state, but for the entire United States. When you look at that role, that you have to work with a presidential cabinet, that you are representing what we think is the fourth largest economy in the entire world, how does that set you apart and your experience apart from these other candidates when you think about it in that context?
Well, it's to me, not a unusual situation to be in, because I was there. Obviously, I wasn't the elected leader, but I was senior advisor to the Prime Minister of the UK, up there alongside California. But I don't know where the UK is now. It's slipping badly because of the terrible policies you got going on there. So the UK, I think, is either sixth or seventh. But operating at that level is something I'm very familiar with. I think the main point, though, is that the role of the governor of California is actually, in my view, to model the kind of policy and performance commensurate with that status, and to show this is what a thriving, growing, innovative economy looks like. And for California to be a model to the world. That's actually how we do it. It's not by running around lecturing everyone and telling them how to do things, or grandstanding on climate change, or running off to Davos and attacking the president, or whatever. All these very political things, partisan things that are all for show. Rather, it's about demonstrating a leadership role in terms of how California performs. I think there's a very important subset of that, which is obviously one of our leading industries, which is technology and AI. I mean, that is a California industry. And so I think it's really important that the governor of California gets it right when it comes to AI. And I see a lot of people around the world getting it wrong, other countries getting it wrong, who don't really understand the technology, don't understand what's happening. And I think that is actually within all the other areas of policy, because we have such a clear global lead, that we have to be a model to the world about how to think about AI, how to handle AI, how to respond to AI.
Well, we have Silicon Valley. We should be responsible. We are the tech hub of the United States here in this state alone. So I think that's really important to focus on that. You have hit on a lot of issue areas that a lot of the other candidates aren't even addressing, aren't even talking about. What would you say are kind of the top few issue areas that you feel really solid on. You just mentioned AI. We have several others. All of a sudden, Hollywood's back in the.
Yes.
I love it when politicians who have been in office at the 11th hour decide they're going to address some of the issues that they've ignored completely throughout their term already. What are some of the other areas that you're really well educated on, have the connections in, have the policies and plans for, that you think the other candidates haven't really approached yet?
Well, I think that broadly, I think that the real focus of what I've been talking about is economic policy, and that's where my strength lies, I think. Most of my career has been in business. I have an instinctive understanding of what it takes to create an economy where businesses can grow and thrive and flourish and create jobs and wealth and opportunities. So that's really been my focus area. But there's a particular area, and I don't know if this is what you were thinking about, but it's one you and I have worked on, where, again, it just seems to me that California should be leading. And we're not just not leading, we're actually the worst. And it's this absolutely shocking proliferation of child sex trafficking in our state, on the watch of these Democrats who lecture everyone about gender equality and all of this and their compassion. And we've become, on their watch, the global capital of child sex trafficking, according to some accounts. And I don't see anybody talking about that at all. It's amazing to me. It's of all the things that you can do, it seems to me one of the ones where you can actually really set yourself a goal of just stopping this. Like with all these, some of these other problems are complicated. They're complex systems. If you want to bring down housing costs, you can't just write an executive order to reduce housing costs. You've got the interplay between local government and counties and house builders and resource costs, and there's so many things to affect there. Of course, you can affect all those areas of policy, but not directly. It's complicated. Same with energy, same with all of these things. But with this one, it seems to me it's something you can just say, no, we are not accepting this at all. The right level of child sex trafficking in California is 0. And we can get to that. And you and I have talked about it. And one of the things I'm most excited about was when you, when we in our conversations, stepped up to say, I can lead the team that's going to stop this. Why aren't the other candidates talking about it? It's amazing to me. Not a single one of them.
That's the question. And I am so eager to get to work on this. I am prepping and planning and waiting for you to be elected, because when you are elected, that means I get to go to work and build this office, connect the great agencies and organizations that are already doing work across the state, but it's not nearly what we could be doing. There's a real blindness here when it comes to political leadership. And it's an interesting thing when we've been watching the debates too. There hasn't really been much talk, and correct me if I'm wrong here, on how to make life better for our kids and safer for our children. We are talking about the economy. We're talking about immigration and ICE, and now we're talking about things like Hollywood, or we're talking about the billionaire's tax. Where is the concern for the safety and well-being of our 10 million children in the state? And you're doing it. You're the one focused on this, but it's just been really a surprise this cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting, and actually beyond the kind of really sharp and evil end of it that we've just discussed, where you'll be leading the work, that whole set of issues around what it's like to be a child and family. I mean, just now on Mother's Day, we published our pledge to mothers.
The Mother's Pledge. Yes, I was going to ask you about it. I would love to hear more.
And then prior to that, I've talked about how we've got to prioritize these areas. And again, it's really been limited, I think, in the conversation and in the debate stage and in the governor's race to the more obvious political areas, for example, education policy. We've had a few questions on what are you going to do about standards of literacy or whatever in the schools. Of course, very important, and I've talk about that. But that basic question of childhood, and it's so central to all. I mean, I'm a parent, you're a parent. You don't have to be a parent. It's just, it's central, actually. And it's not discussed. It's very interesting. You're right. It just hasn't come up.
Well, let me bring something up to you that should have been brought up. LA USD, sexual abuse of children scandals. I want to read this and get your take on it. And of course, in addition to California producing in the past some of the lowest reading and testing scores, which is a disgrace. LAUSD, the Unified School District, is facing over $1 billion in total projected costs, $1 billion, including interest and financing, to settle this massive influx of child sexual abuse claims. So in an attempt to deal with this, the board has authorized a total of $750 million in bonds as of a couple of months ago, intended to pay out to victims. So the plan is to pay them off. And I haven't heard anyone discuss any plans to stop this, to address it, other than taking those teachers and those staff who have been accused of this, they're shuffling them to other schools.
This is the point that's so outrageous. And this is why this has been allowed to happen. Because you've got a worker protection program in place here, which is basically the teacher unions, that absolutely defend their members, that they see that as their, not just their top priority, their only priority. It's all they ever focus on. And so it's an instinctive knee-jerk reaction to say, we are not going to let any kind of disciplinary or accountability measures to be taken with respect to teachers. And so teachers get tenure in California, amazingly. Public school teachers, the idea of tenure was to preserve academic freedom at universities, so that you can pursue whatever line of research, you can write what you want because you can't be fired. That's the point of tenure at universities. You've now got tenure for teachers in public schools after, it's barely 2 years. It's something like 16, 19 months. It varies depending on who you talk to about the exact moment when you're locked in and you can't be fired, really, as a public school teacher. We shouldn't have tenure at all for public school teachers, let alone tenure that protects child predators. It's astonishing. But that's the teacher union. That's who they are. That's who they fight for.
It's pretty incredible that Gavin Newsom and our AG currently, Rob Bonta, have really patted each other on the back over all of the fraud and abuse that they're finding. And yet there are things like LAUSD having to take $1 billion. I mean, we are paying for this.
But no, it's a tax increase, exactly. Every time you hear bond, that's a tax increase.
Yeah. Incredible.
Well, remember that these Democrat politicians are owned by the teacher union.
Yes.
I mean, they're the biggest. I mean, if you look at Gavin Newsom's donations over the 16 years he's been running statewide as a proxy for other Democrat politicians by category, the number one category is government unions. Number two, by the way, is interesting, trial lawyers. And so you wonder why we are just plagued with litigation in this state. Whatever you try and do, there's a lawsuit. If you run a restaurant, you have these PAGA lawsuits, or any kind of business like that where you're employing people, wage and hour claims, ADA claims, a CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, endless litigation there that's blocking the construction of it. Wherever you look, there's a lawsuit. And that's because the trial lawyers own the politicians. And so year by year, through the legislature, they enact all this stuff that gives what they call a private right of action. So anyone can sue anyone. And that's where we've ended up. I mean, by the way, it's one of the reasons insurance costs are so high in California. They call it a tort tax, where you've basically got, the last estimate I saw was that for every insurance premium in California, it's between $3,000 and $15,000, depending on where you are, purely to cover the cost of lawsuits.
People wonder why there's this mass exodus of California, but we're getting hit in so many ways. It's death by 10,000 cuts, not even 1,000. And it's almost making it to, the point where we can't really survive here. But you're unwinding it all. And one of the best ways you're starting already to act as our interim governor-elect in many ways is that you started Cal Doge, which has been such a winner. Tell us what the latest is with Cal Doge. You've just released your first bloat report. I love this. On the heels of so many fraud cases being exposed. And what you found was 35 times the size of bureaucracy running the show than any other state. Yes.
So that, and specifically in one area of policy, which is electricity regulation, because you got to take it in chunks because there's so much bloat. You're right. We've published at Cal Doge 5 fraud reports now where we've been looking at as the name suggests, the financial fraud, and we've uncovered different examples of that, ranging from $1 billion for I don't even want to get into it. Let's focus. There's a lot.
There's
exactly.
so much.
And we've also, just to sort of put a line under that, one of our fraud reports did the global estimate in terms of the total fraud in California. Our estimate, based on public data that we've analyzed, $425 billion over the past 5 years. That's about $80 billion a year averaged out. That's 20% of the budget. Works out about $22,000 for every taxpayer. Wow. So that's fraud, and we'll continue to expose that. But when I announced Cal Doge, I was clear that there's 2 parts to the work: finding the fraud, but also finding ways to shut down and cut back this bloated nanny state bureaucratic government that we have. This proliferation of agencies and regulators and commissions and so on in Sacramento. And they're the ones that are driving so much of this cost and hassle in terms of regulation that makes it impossible to run a business. And so I said, I don't just want to do the fraud, I want to do the bloat. And that was our first bloat report. We looked at the area of electricity regulation. You have 4 different agencies all having something to do with electricity regulation: the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, CAISO, the Independent System Operator. And if you add it all up and you look at the number of people in there, you're right, 35 times what it is in other states on a per capita basis. On top of that, the cost of it, $1.2 billion to run the system. That's before any electricity is even generated. Just the bureaucracy. It's insane. So we've proposed merging 3 of those, the Public Utilities Commission, Energy Commission, and CAISO, and focusing its role on what it should be, just regulating the industry instead of all this other political, ideological stuff, and restoring CARB, the California Air Resources Board, to its original remit, which is air quality, not all this climate stuff. And remember, people mix them up, but carbon emissions, and see it, that's a climate goal. That is not the same as air quality, which was what the Air Resources Board originally was supposed to do. And our estimate, just by making that change, is that we reduce electricity prices by 25%. Just through that. That's before we get to reversing some of the damaging climate policies that have caused us to have the highest electric bills in the country apart from Hawaii. They've doubled in the last 10 years. So you've got all this bureaucracy, and meanwhile prices go up for consumers and businesses.
Steve, is it fair to say that these Democrat candidate frontrunners, Tom Steyer, the billionaire, right, who has pumped now something like $160 million into this race, that's a different conversation of how that skews things, and Javier Becerra, who even members who served in the Biden cabinet with him said a plastic bag could have done a better job than Becerra did as the head of HHS. Is it fair to say that they would not address anything with regard to this fraud, this bloat, should they be elected?
They're creatures of the bloat. That's who they are. They're different. Becerra is absolutely, look at who he is. 36 years without interruption, a career politician. He's done nothing else other than be a creature of this system. Of course he's not going to change it. He's going to make it worse, just as he did when he was HHS secretary. Tom Steyer is different, and he'll be worse in different ways, because he's taken this interesting position of going further to the left, I think, to pander to the interest groups that run the Democratic Party and the machine. And so his positions are worse. So you can expect, he wants to increase spending, increase government regulation, increase all the things that have driven us to the brink of real economic collapse in California. And so they're either more of the same or even worse.
It's funny, I try to write my interview questions out as close to the interview as possible, especially these days, because things change. Things change not just daily, they're changing hourly. And I had written this question to ask you. Do you think Democrats, Tom Steyer or Javier Becerra, are a gateway vote to socialism? And then the day after that, the DSA endorsed
Tom Steyer, I know.
I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
But we're there. We're not even approaching it. It's not even gateway anymore.
Yeah. No, it's very clear that they've learnt nothing from the failure of these 16 years. I mean, the way to think about the 16 years of one-party rule is this is what you get when the Democrats get everything they want. They've had everything their own way. All the statewide elected offices, all the 2/3 majority in the legislature, all the big counties, all the big cities, 6-1 majority on the state Supreme Court. People overlook that. They've had everything that they want. And it's a total calamitous failure. It's been an experiment in far left governance, the like of which we've never seen in America before, and the results are in. It's a total failure. And what's their response? Instead of learning from it, it's either let's keep it going, Javier Becerra, or let's make it even worse, Tom Steyer. It's kind of astonishing. I think it speaks to the arrogance that one-party rule breeds. They really don't think they're going to be challenged. I mean, if they felt any real sense of political challenge and competition, if they weren't so arrogant that they think they're just going to be in power forever, they just have to sit on top of this machine and ride it to victory, they wouldn't be saying what they're saying. They would be saying, you know what, things aren't going well, and we need a bit of a rethink, which you've seen from Democrats in the past, and you've seen from other parties. Bill Clinton in the late 80s and the early 90s actually challenged the Democratic Party and said, we've gone too far left, our policies aren't working, they're not delivering for the people we claim to support, we've got to go in a different direction. Nothing like that is happening in the Democratic Party, nothing. I mean, it's barely happening nationally. It's happening, it's not just not happening in California, they're doubling down on the failure. It's amazing.
Yeah, that has been a theme, hasn't it? My goodness. Well, I've only got you for a couple more minutes, Steve. This has been fascinating, and I could ask you a million more questions. But I really want to get to the issues that are going to move voters, because this is what it's coming down to. We've got to vote early. You've got to ballot harvest. You've got a great video up on socials about how to ballot harvest. We have to do this. The Democrats
Yes, you've got to get your vote in. Yeah.
Do it early. Showing up to vote on the day of is fine, right? But we really want to get those ballots in as early as possible. I want to have you squash a rumor.
Yes.
If you're up for it.
Of course.
A couple. Really quick. You founded CrowdPack in 2013 as a startup, and you stayed until you weren't happy with the direction that it was going.
Well, I changed the direction. But anyway, what's the question?
Well, the question is, can you clarify it? Because people have said, well, this guy started, CrowdPack, and maybe he's really a Democrat in Republicans' clothing, which we do laugh at, because no one in their right mind is going to be a Democrat and then run for any office in the state of California as a Republican. That doesn't always, serve you well in a Democrat majority voting.
No, it's a laugh. I laugh because it's so ridiculous. So CrowdPack is a business. Unlike a lot of people leveling these criticisms, I've started and run businesses. It's a crowdfunding platform. That was the concept. The elevator pitch, as it were, was Kickstarter for politics and political causes. So a way for candidates and people who want to get involved in politics to raise money. Another way of thinking about it, GoFundMe, but particularly designed for political fundraising. And the whole point of it was to be an open platform for anyone to use, just as X is a platform for anyone to use. And we launched it, as you mentioned, 2013, and it started growing. It really took off after the 2016 election. And it was an ironic thing, because I supported President Trump in the 2016 election, much to some cost, actually, to a lot of people thought, what are you doing supporting Trump? Well, I was very clear that he was the right choice. So I was completely clear about that. And I was at the same time CEO of this platform, but it's an open platform. We had team members who were from the Democrats and Republicans, actually quite a nice example of working together, because we were an open platform available to all. What happened after 2016 was that CrowdPack really became adopted through a market process. No one particularly encouraged this. We were just out there selling the use of the platform to everyone. We wanted everybody to use it. And so what happened after 2016, it really became, in some ways, the home of the resistance. to President Trump. And so you saw a lot of left-wing causes and Democrats use the platform by choice because we had good tools that people could use. I was very actively trying to encourage Republicans to use it. I remember going to sit down with the RNC in Washington and say, look, here's a great platform. You should be pushing this to your candidates. They weren't interested. So what happened was by the time you got to 2018, those midterms, the first Trump midterms, it really was clear that the platform had been almost taken over by the left. And at that point, I thought, you know what, we need to make a change because by saying that we were a non-partisan platform, we were actually cutting off the ability to work with various organizations that were partisan. And from a business point of view, that didn't make sense. So I looked at the data, and I remember the numbers very clearly. At that time, 87% of the candidates running on our platform were Democrats. 93% of the money raised was for Democrats. And I thought, well, we're not actually, we may say we're nonpartisan, but in practice, the market has spoken. Democrat is basically a platform for the left, in which case we should just say that and be open about it. Then we'll do more business. But of course, I can't possibly run that. So I spoke to the board about it. We engineered a change, became a partisan platform. I stepped away from the company. The company was later sold. So that's the story there.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying.
I mean,
that.
just one thing I'll say.
Perfect sense.
It's like criticizing me for people of different backgrounds politically using a platform is exactly the same as blaming Elon Musk because Democrats are on X.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the clarification. It makes perfect sense. All right, I've got to let you go. You're the hardest working candidate I've ever seen in my 20 years of working with candidates. We appreciate you.
Of course, great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Close us out, Steve. Anything that you want to address, leave with voters as we, are a freight train rushing toward the June 2nd primary. Final thoughts from
Vote. It's very simple. You got to vote. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to this and you haven't voted yet, please don't assume that an opinion poll lead turns into votes, just where we began. It won't happen unless you vote. And by the way, there's a very real possibility still that you end up with 2 Democrats in the top 2. It's very close at the top. Don't take these polls where I'm leading for granted. It's very close, actually. You could easily see a top 2 of Javier Becerra and Tom Steyer unless you vote. And right now, I'm the leading Republican by a long way, leading in the polls, leading on fundraising, endorsed by the leader of our party, the president. And so we've got to get behind the leader to guarantee a Republican in the top 2, because if we don't have a Republican, there's no chance for change. So make sure you vote. Tell everyone, get those votes in as early as possible. That's the only way we guarantee we make this happen.
100%. That's it. Steve, thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Great to be with you. I really enjoyed it.
Always good to be with you. Thank you all for joining us for this special episode of Politically Basic, where we break down the basics of every political issue so that you get to decide. Make sure you're following us on socials at Politically Basic and at Being Kyle Campbell, and we'll see you next time.